Hello and good afternoon to this afternoon session of the Implementers Forum, where we today talk about the digital responsibility. And I'm happy to guide you through this session of 90 minutes. My name is Simone Manne and I do the moderation. The Implementers Forum is not typical panel discussion. It should be a fast speed exchange of ideas with pitches to bring together stakeholders from business and civil society. And we use it and we want to use it for getting ideas, networking, discussion. And we therefore invite you all as a listener to also use the chat function for the whole period so that during the discussion, which we will have, I can use it and take your questions and discuss with the speakers or as well with you. This Implementers Forum is live streamed and recorded, and it is a closed format with exclusive access to participants. Let me give you a little bit more of an overview about the organization. We will have the topic, as mentioned, corporate digital responsibility. And the question is, what should be digital standards, the code of conduct to uphold values and democracy? What are data security, privacy to earn customer trust? Does that also mean responsibility regarding a clean, meaning climate clean, sustainable technology? All these could be questions, especially for us in Germany. The question could also be, what does digital responsibility mean regarding a year of lots of elections? And we saw already that maybe misuse of digital platforms end up in not the right corporate responsibility. So all this, I think, are interesting questions which we may touch. So how do we want to do this all? After a keynote given by Christian Kastrup, we will have 3 pitches, all of them 3 to 4 minutes. And then we will have the first discussion round of 20 minutes, where you can all participate. After that, we will have another 3 pitches, again 3 to 4 minutes. And another round of discussion followed by a wrap up and hopefully a lot of insight and networking in between. So for the keynote, I would like now to hand over to Christian Kastrup. He is the State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection. And in this ministry, the initiative has started and was handed or given over because of the importance of that topic. And I think Christian will tell us more now in his keynote.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simone, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Yes, indeed. So the Implementers Forum has always been part of the Global Solutions Summit, and I look really forward to it. This is my 3rd or 4th GSS. So, and I think this one, even as it is virtual, it will be just the same success as the other ones. And congrats also to the whole team. So, of course, the Implementers Forum is a very specific format with short idea pitches, as you said, allows for a direct exchange between academics, civil society, business and politicians. And so it's always given us a good sense of direction. So it has consistently helped shed light on urgent problems faced by civil society and industry and politicians, of course, in the end. And moreover, it has encouraged, I think, the best of the best to share their brightest ideas for overcoming interesting problems and going to the future. So, unfortunately, of course, due to COVID-19, so we are unable to do this in analog mode. So we can't do it in person, but we have to use full-blown technology here. And of course, this technology also has advanced rather quickly over the last COVID year, making it possible for me now to talk to you virtually and you to participate from all around the world and help us to discuss. So with the pandemic, of course, all of us have become acutely aware of the digital revolution taking place around us. And children are, as my son, in home office and homeschool. So he's in homeschool, I am in home office sometimes, but I cannot escape the office on the other hand. But I think you can very quickly, you have the initial benefits of a flexible working environment, but this is overshadowed, of course, by the logistics of childcare. You do miss the quick chats with colleagues in the office. And I also remember a lot of very tiresome whole day video calls, working with 7 different systems in a minute. And it's really not easy to don't getting confused. So, but as we have seen, technology can empower us to make the best of challenging times. So it can also pose risks to society if not handled responsible by users, government, civil society and companies. So think about the increase in fake news, disinformation, dark patterns, hate speech and full-blown digital surveillance we have witnessed in some countries during the pandemic. So there is a result. Populist, right-wing extremist movements are also on the rise in many countries. And there is an issue. How can we as society respond to these developments? So, and this is, I think, which brings us neatly to the question we face today: who drives digital responsibility? And we put it into 2 antagonists here, but there are more involved: civil society or business, at politics, at other issues to that. So, I really believe, nevertheless, that companies have an obligation to use new technologies. There are great new economic models we have to take an advantage, but also to deploy technological developments responsibly. And I think that's an entire point. And in a way, that serves then the public and the civil society common good. So only if civil society, business and governments act together with a shared sense of responsibility, consumers, users will trust corporations, public services and the digital transformation at all. So, and I think the most important currency today is probably not a certain digital currency we talked a lot about in the last months, but this is trust. And I really think this is all about building trust for the digital transformation. So, proposals for the European regulations such as the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, Data Governance Act and AI regulation are currently negotiated with the aim of strengthening civil society and consumer rights and correcting the downside issues of digital markets. But of course, legislative procedures take time and they are thus not always best suited in times of an accelerating technological progress. And therefore we need more, and therefore we need a starting for corporate digital responsibility, or CDR in short. And already starting in May 2018, the Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection, together with a number of companies, started this initiative. And we try to encourage and implement digital standards forward-looking beyond what would be required by law at a certain point in time. So let's use this forum here today to exchange the best and brightest ideas, as I said at the beginning, how to build that digital transformation. I thank again Global Solutions Initiative for organizing this year's Implementers Forum on that issue. Thank all the speakers and discussants and participants for taking their time. So I give it back to you, Simone, for the next 1 and 15 minutes. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. That was a good insight about the problematic, and obviously you mentioned that there is not much, or that there is time needed for all the regulations. On the other hand, there is not much time to solve problems which we already have, especially, as I mentioned, maybe in a year of election in Germany. So I'm looking forward for what kind of ideas do we hear from our speakers, and how we can continue to support the digital responsibility for citizens, governments, and businesses. As I mentioned, we will do that first in pitches. And the pitches, I can give the speakers a little bit more time if you need it, but you don't have to take it. So we said 3 minutes. We have up to 4 minutes today. We will start with Huberta von Voss-Wittig. Huberta is the executive director of the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, and they are powering solutions to the extremism and the polarization. So, Huberta, we are looking forward to your pitch and to your speech.
So am I. Thank you so much for having me. It's a true pleasure to be with you. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to share a little bit about the Business Council for Democracy, which is a fairly new project. This is an initiative of 3 organizations: the Hertie Foundation, our think tank, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, also known as ISD, as well as the Robert Bosch Foundation. Before I jump in, let me give you a little bit of framing. I think it's terrific that the Global Solutions Summit is offering a forum for fresh and innovative, solution-oriented thinking that is grounded in multilateral engagement. We certainly need more co-learning and cooperation between like-minded liberal democracies and their stakeholders. What we also need is more, may I say, also more innovative, multi-sectoral approaches to problem solving. And the president of GSS, Dennis Noah, rightly said that we are experiencing a watershed moment. That is certainly true when it comes to the range of hybrid and analog threats to democracy, to the very heart of our societies, the human rights that our societies are built on. The transnational amplification of disinformation has gone through the roof, and the impact on society cohesion and our very ability to craft good public policy is tangible. The trust capital that we need to invest in necessary reforms is decreasing, if not dwindling. The pandemic has unfortunately been the hour of anti-democratic actors, non-state, as much as state actors, and ISD is observing that in close cooperation with Reset Tech and Felix Carter every day. They are exploiting legal gaps that we could close. They are exploiting knowledge gaps that we could close. And they are exploiting our silence on hate, its acceleration and normalization. Now, here's the good news. None of what we're seeing is a natural law. We can and we should do everything in our capacity to stem the tide of polarization and extremism. And for that, we need new alliances, of which businesses must be part. The Edelman Trust Barometer for 2021 shows a dramatic decline in trust. Trust in institutions, trust in government, trust in politicians, trust in science. CEOs or employers at large seem to be the only group that enjoys a relatively high trust with an approval rate of 61%. That doesn't seem high, but it is. So the Business Council for Democracy, abbreviated BC4D, is investing this trust back into our societies to protect democracy. We believe that the digital age requires a new skill set. We believe our adult citizens, not just the young, need to learn how to discern disinformation and conspiracy myth. And we believe they need to understand the consequences of hate, both online and offline. The silencing of important voices who are targeted because of their reform agenda, their gender or sexual identity, their racial origins affects all of us. It impacts our ability to find the best possible solutions in vibrant debates. So BC4D makes 2 offers to society. First, it enables businesses to take a stance in regard to polarization and extremism. It fosters an alliance of powerful voices who say no to the normalization of hate, the shifting norms that endanger the very foundation of democracy, human rights. It encourages teams to ask difficult questions to themselves. Is our behavior online in sync with our offline values? Do we do whatever is in our power to protect the openness of our society so that our debates remain a race of the best ideas, not the nastiest or the most destructive ones? We need businesses to step up and to push back against polarization, and the BC4D is providing an important platform for that. We would like to inspire the debate by providing insights and drive the agenda forward hand in hand, not against businesses, but with businesses, and to help them to define their own role in protecting democracy. Second, the BC4D offers cost-neutral trainings to employees to gain internet citizenship skills. Now, what is that? Online hate, disinformation, and conspiracy myths are man-made because algorithms are too, because the development of IA is still in our control, at least to a certain extent. So we offer a curriculum that transfers knowledge and skills to foster resilience against manipulation. We want to foster a sense of awareness that we have a responsibility to protect our society, our democracy, and our freedom, and that it matters to show digital courage. Our participants learn how to check facts, how to report hate messages, how to engage in counter speech, and much, much more. The pilot phase has just ended, and 96% of participants would recommend our course. Our 6 partner companies, among them Volkswagen, the Kion Group, Alba, Evonik, UFA, and Nomos Glashütte, do all want to continue, which is wonderful. And our door is open for anyone who wants to know more and participate. We are scaling the program as of September. So please go to our website, bc4d.org, or ping me on LinkedIn and I'll connect you to the team. Thank you.
That's a great offer. Thank you so much, Huberta. And I think we see already that things are possible, and it's not given that we accept what is happening. So a great offer from your side. And now I would like to hear from Felix Korte, what he has to say in his 3 to 4 minutes. Hello, Felix.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to previous speakers for their excellent inputs. Thank you to Huberta as well for touching already on one very critical element of the collective solutions we have to find to digital threats to democracy, which is indeed digital literacy. I would like to circle back a little bit on the role that democratic governments have to play in defining the rules of the game for democracy online. I think there are quite some gaps to fill still. I think that we have seen in previous election cycles, just recently in the US, for instance, that the power that tech companies like Facebook and Google wield over the democratic process is too large and it's unchecked. Those companies, for instance, decide what information or disinformation voters get to see as they form their opinions. They decide whose voices will be heard and whose voices will be silenced. They decide what level of protection, for instance, female candidates or vulnerable groups in society get to enjoy in the face of digital hate and harassment. And they decide what private information can be used to target us with election ads and other means of influence. It's even them who decide whether foreign states, authoritarian states, often get to interfere with our election processes. And there are a lot of other things that I don't think these companies should decide on in isolation. Indeed, I think that as democratic societies, we would be foolish to leave these crucial oversight functions to companies alone. The recent US elections, which have left a bitter taste in a lot of mouths, I think, have showed us what turns democracy can take if we don't formulate very clear expectations and standards for tech companies. Unfortunately, so far, lawmakers haven't fully caught up with digital communication technology from a regulatory point of view, even though there are very positive signs. And as State Secretary Kastrup mentions, of course, clever and smart regulation takes time. However, regulation is coming too late for this federal election process in Germany this year. So it will be once again for civil society to play the role of a watchdog, to push for free, fair, and transparent digital election processes. That's precisely what we do as Reset. That's what we do with a broad coalition of civil society partners and partners from research and academia. We will track disinformation and hate campaigns. We will track and disclose privacy violations, foreign interference, and hold tech companies to account. And we will hold political campaigners to account for their conduct in the election process. I don't think, though, that civil society should be doing this alone. I think that industry has an important role to play in this. Industry, large corporations in Germany control what tech companies like Facebook and Google crave the most, and that's advertising budget. I think that it would look very good on German industry players to pressure tech companies to do more to protect democracy online in this crucial election year, and threaten to freeze their ad spending if they don't beef up their actions to counter online hate and disinformation. That's it.
Wonderful. Very good proposals and meaningful proposals to start immediately, but let's discuss later. So what is the competitive advantage? How can we make it attractive for businesses to play their role regarding responsibility? Felix, you mentioned they should be responsible and maybe just don't do advertisements anymore. But of course, then they may say, I may lose customers, and so it's so important for me. Or Huberta, you said if we offer training, but training may be interesting only for people who are already alert, and the others may not come because they stay in their bubble and feel comfortable there. So what could we do to start business to bring their people to training or to stop advertisements if there is a misbehavior? Maybe Huberta, you start?
Okay, love to. Felix, do you mind? So I think that integrity is a very big and important criteria for customers and for employees, right? People do not want to work for a company that doesn't live by its own rules. And this authenticity that has become more important for the younger generation can drive this forward. We didn't find it difficult at all to find partners for the Business Council for Democracy. And why is that? Because I think in our society, I mean, as much as I can speak for Germany, we do understand that the center of society matters. It really matters. You need to fortify it, and we need to protect it. And it is one thing to target extremism and polarization actors and disinformation actors, and we do that in our organization for sure in many different ways together with Felix' organization. But it is another thing to also come up with solutions for the center of society, for those who are actually still behind democracy, who care about democracy. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that democracy is happening under new circumstances. That's what Felix has spoken about so beautifully. And these skills and this knowledge isn't transferred yet, right? Because the technological development has been so fast and is ever evolving. And that's the gap that we need to close. And I feel it's not a hard sell, may I say so. It wasn't a hard sell to fill these classes, which is encouraging. And it wasn't difficult to find partners, which is equally encouraging.
That is good news. That is good news. Wonderful. Max is back now, but I first asked Felix because we did this bridging question, and then we will hand over to Max. So yeah, okay.
That's great, and I'm glad that Max is back. I think that actually a big German brands would probably fortify and improve their competitive edge if they were more conscious about how they spend their advertising budget, because very often, without them necessarily knowing, their ads will appear next to, for instance, anti-Semitic hate speech, websites that spread conspiracy theories, health disinformation, all kinds of harmful content, simply because the profit guarantee of these huge platforms of ad tech companies is that there are no ethical limits to automation, and there is no transparency for brands either. So I think that actually it would be good for them to be more cautious about how they spend their advertising budget and where they place their brands. I also want to approach the question on a macro level though, and turn back to regulation, because I think that if Europe manages to define regulatory standards for the digital advertising market that comply with fundamental rights, we can actually improve the opportunities of European businesses to thrive in this sector as well. Because currently, I think there is a little competitive disadvantage if we look across the Atlantic in particular.
Great. Thank you very much, Felix. And now we get to the third pitch. So Max, you are back. We are happy that you are still here and with us and keen to listen to you.
Okay, so sorry again for the bad internet connection. I guess a very brief pitch. The main point I would like to make is starting from the majority of digital tools our grandchildren will be using has not been developed yet. So we are at the very early days of digital transformation. And what does that mean for the role of civil society and the role of business? I mean, Christian Kastrop obviously has told you a bit about the role of government, but to these two sectors, I guess, firstly, I mean, obviously there is a role for civil society when it comes to a watchdog function or a pressure group function. And every day as a government official, I'm happy that there is civil society and that they are actors who are actually pointing out, for example, that facial recognition that we're using here is built on certain practices happening in China that we will not actually agree with ethically. But I think as the majority of digital tools has yet to be developed, there's a huge role for civil society actually developing digital tools. And that is something we are funding as a government, for example, be it the prototype fund in the science ministry or a huge initiative, the labor ministry and other ministries are currently kickstarting, where you really try to bring civil society actors together to innovate and actually create the digital tools we are about to use in the future. But also as a second role of civil society, really bringing together the digital practitioners of the future. So when you think about actually applying digital technologies to an urban landscape, a workplace, or different kind of social relations, there is actually a lot of work to do, right? So you do need people who are implementing technology into these realms. And I think there's a huge role for civil society actually to organize those practitioners to develop a certain vocational ethic. And we are at the very start of this development. So that could be two roles of civil society not being underlined that much yet, I guess. And secondly, when it comes to business, obviously, I think as we had a discussion about the ecological sphere as a common good, we should have a debate about the digital sphere as a common good, right? And most companies, most private sector actors, obviously are acting within this common good. And this common good can be a skilled workforce or a stable liberal democracy, things you've been talking about in the past minutes. And I think we really should develop a certain framework, how to speak about the responsibility of private sector actors when it comes to this common good. Because as Christian Kastrop has been laying out in the beginning, I think trust and the kind of fragile common good of a society that is open, that is liberal, that is to some extent embracing progress and technological development is the most important asset we do have as Europeans and as Germans. And I think it will be an interesting discussion to have. How do you actually make private sector actors acknowledge this kind of common good, and that you cannot only take from this common good, but you actually have to provide this common good so that it will exist in the future. And I think the initiative Huberta has been describing very much works to this aim. And I think when we have this very dichotomous picture of like China, very, like public sector driven, the US, very private sector driven, the most interesting thing I personally believe is really how do you bring the different sectors together. And we as Europeans, we always talk about where do we sit on this dichotomy between the US and China. But I think the most important question really is what kind of working together of the three actors of like public, civil society and government do we need at this very early stage of entering the digital sphere. And I guess this is the main argument I'm trying to make here. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we may immediately start with the discussion. And the discussion is open for all participants, not only for the first three speakers. So everybody feel free to put questions into the chat function or speak up. But I think there is already a first question from Huberta to Max in the chat. So I read it. You totally agree, Huberta, that civil society is well positioned to drive innovation forward, but government is risk averse. We need innovation funds for civil society. So would you be open to that thought? Shall we budget for especially for that? And is the Ministry of Finance ready to do that?
Well, I think like on the one hand, what we just did is to use some part of the budget on artificial intelligence to start this program I have been describing, which is the Labor Ministry and a couple of other actors trying really to steer and to ignite innovation in civil society, to come up with ideas how to use digital technologies that are then very much oriented at the public good. But obviously, you're right, Huberta, particularly when it comes to procurement, when it comes to the question, whom do you actually use as the one providing you with digital solutions? Governments usually choose the most risk-averse road, obviously. And I think there is something to learn from other countries, and particularly like in the COVID-19 situation. I mean, we saw what kind of tools have been used by different countries and how savvy and agile governments actually are when it comes to collaborating with the private sector and civil society when it comes to finding the best digital solution.
Huberta, I think you switched on your phone and you have your hand up. So
yeah, I would just like to respond because I've spent the last 11 years in the US and in the UK. And I would just like to say that the German government has done an impressive job recently. I mean, you have gone out of your way to find and create funds that actually enable us to do the work that we ought to be doing. The only thing that really needs to happen now is processes need to be sped up. For instance, we've been observing a spike in anti-Semitic messaging for months, and it is frightening. It is normalizing the content, and it's changing society in front of our eyes. There was a fund. It took them a year to look at the proposals that came in. Even if 40 proposals came in, that can be done in a 2 months time, right? So that's my request, my urge as a former government employee that I was as well is we have a time window. And this time window, as you said, might be closing, right? It's a competition between systems, between those who want to damage democracy and between those who believe that it's still the best system. And so we need to work together and close that gap.
Before you answer, Max, there's also Felix who wants to has his hands up, and as we don't want to have it a dialogue as a discussion, we first collect some questions, I think, or comments. Felix.
Yes, a little comment from my side, because I think Max's ideas sound very good. I want to add a grain of salt. I was an EU official for 5 years myself. I recently quit EU service and started working for Reset here in Germany. I worked on tech regulation in Brussels. Of course, we want civil society to play a more active role also in formulating policies, but this is really not the reality at the moment. There's an incredible power gap between corporate lobbying and like civil society interest representation and formulation. And I think it's absolutely critical that government actually institutionalizes this kind of cooperation and exchange of ideas that we're seeing here today, for instance. So I'm very grateful to Christian Kastrop and Dominic, of course, as well, for being so open and inviting towards civil society and allow them to have their voices heard. I think that the problem is even bigger now that we are talking specifically about companies like Facebook and Google, because they create systematic incentives for civil society institutions, for researchers, and also for media to self-censor and kind of, let's say, couch their criticism towards their business model because they pay them, or because researchers, for instance, are dependent on access to Facebook data to do their work. And companies like Facebook use all of these tools strategically to influence political opinion in their favor. So I think that government really needs to step up even more and create these systematic interfaces for civil society to make their voices heard.
Okay, as Max is not the only one, I think here for the government, because we have Dominic with his hands up and may also have a point. Dominic, you are from the Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection, right?
Yes, I am. Perhaps there are too many people from the government here. I don't think that's the case, but let me nevertheless just ask a very quick question to all those three who have delivered fantastic inputs here. So one very simple question that comes to my mind is, do you think that at the core of the problem is that certain business models, companies respectively, have accumulated a huge amount of market power that is at the root of the problem, and we haven't really understood how we can get hold of this market power? You're seeing superstar firms emerge. You see that markups, prices over marginal costs have surged a lot. So market power is excessive, and I believe this is important, feeds into the issue of hate speech and disinformation, because if there is not enough competition, those platforms become huge, and they become platforms that shape to a disproportionate amount public debate and the advertisement budgets that have been mentioned already. So one of the questions that comes to my mind is, don't you think we really have to set up a new regime of modern competition that lives up to those very disruptive and market power-oriented business models, and how can we solve that problem? Thank you.
Okay, let's answer three speakers. Short answer, because we have also Philip with an important remark and explanation, and I want to fill Philip into this round of discussion. So all three of you, maybe a short comment to the question and maybe also to the other discussion points.
I let Felix answer for me because we have the same position.
Okay. Okay.
2 in 1.
I try to be very quick. I think Dominic is completely right. And I think we also need to approach online harms to democracy from a consumer perspective, because when I sign up to Facebook's terms of services, for instance, they owe me an online experience that is free of disinformation and hate speech and privacy misuses, like data misuses. That's the agreement that I enter with them. But however, they have no systematic incentive at the moment to honor their own commitment towards me as a consumer, because there is nowhere else I can go. So I actually think, like, in an ideal world where we have a more plural online information ecosystems, more platforms, actually this could be a great incentive for platforms to do a better job in protecting fundamental rights and individual security on their platforms.
Great. Max?
So very, very briefly, firstly, to the point of Dominic, I think you're absolutely right that we might run into the situation as a government that we want to change the rules of the game while it's a whole different game being played, you know. And I think the discussion people are having in the States about the attention economy and how the basic principles of how business models work is changing. And I think this is also something Christian Turun has been posing in the chat. I mean, yes, that is absolutely right. And only when we as government, as civil society, and as also as organized private sector are at the forefront of really understanding what is happening at the level of business models, then we are able to actually shape the development. If not, if we are falling behind, we are really using the capacity to act. And to Huberta's point, I think, yes, I mean, we as a government, we are in the same situation when it comes to digital transformation like all companies. And the situation is you have to develop some kind of ambidexterity, right? So we have to keep the basic model of governing running with all the principles and transparency and, you know, how democracy works. But we also have to develop a certain savviness when it comes to being more agile, being more innovative, being faster, being more up for taking risks. And when it comes to Germany, I mean, that is hard. I mean, it's also about certain laws and principles in our constitution about how we use public money that make it, let's say, not that easy to be, you know, very agile when it comes to using this money for certain innovative practices. Yes, I mean, that is an ambidexterity we are facing, and we have to develop as a government. I fully agree.
Great, Max. Thank you very much. And now to Philip. Philip, you say we don't really only need new legislation, we also must make more use of the instruments we have. So please let us hear your opinion.
Yes, thank you very much. So first to Dominic's point, I think in many respects we already have very, very far-reaching legislation. And I would just like to remind us of this fact. So for example, the German Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, the law on hate speech on social networks, is the toughest in Europe and has inspired countries like Russia and Malaysia to do similar legislation. Not saying it's a wrong approach, but it's definitely a far-reaching one. Or if you look at sanctions in the privacy area, the GDPR has multiplied the ability of public authorities to sanction. It's up to 4% of global turnover now. Or you know, look at the DSA and DMA initiatives on the European level that Felix, I think, has been publishing on. They are really transferring the social networks into some sort of you know, publicly administered sphere. So I think we have a lot of instruments, and we may also need more than that. But on the other hand, what I saw in my legal work is that very often we don't use what we have. I'll give you an example. I've heard many prosecutors in Germany saying that people very rarely file criminal complaints against hate speech, even where people openly disclose their identity on Facebook, which they have to do because that's the default position in Facebook's network. Or to give you another example of, I believe, a very creative approach in the civil society, there's a social legal tech platform called Hate Aid. And what they do is they turn it around. They file civil claims against haters on Facebook and other networks and seek damages from them, which is a very creative way of turning the whole situation around. So what I mean is there's a lot we can do already, and we should also use that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Philip. I now take Helena, but we have to be short. because it's your pitch coming soon. So just a short message.
We can move on to the next comment. That's fine.
Okay. So then I would say for the strict timekeeping, we first do the next 3 pitches, and then there is still time for further discussion. And Helena, I think you may build it in then into your pitch or in the discussion afterwards. Great. So the first pitch in the second row will be by Leonis Petschmann. He is managing partner and COO by Vindelici. Is that right? You can tell us, Leonis, in a minute. So empowering employees in digital transformation, as far as I understood, is what you are behind. So let us hear more.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. Yeah, it's completely right. You can say it in Italian or a Latin way, so it's fine. First, I have to say a lot of very interesting points. What you said, Roberta, I think the high trust in the CEOs, it's also what I'm seeing in business, but it's also, I think, takes a lot of responsibility for them and us, for do something. Also, your second point, the business has to stand up. I totally agree. Because with that responsibility, I think business tends very often to be in the background a little bit, to not really say what we believe in, because there's always some risk when you face customers. And I think that is the time now to really change that. And also thinking of what you said, Felix, you talked about a lot of advertisement. I completely agree, but I think the core of the company is the vision and the strategy. So you really have to implement it in the core of the companies. Even I would go far more than I think Christian said. To say, okay, it's not just CSR, it's really the core. You have to implement in your vision and your strategy. And that's also what we are trying. I have a very young company, 3 years old, and I thought, okay, I have to change something, so I just try a new form of company. And so what we are doing is not just put it into values. I have to say we put it in our vision. And so, for example, we're helping in digital transformation. So it's a lot about technologies, how to get technology work. But in our vision, we stated that we say, okay, but we put the people first. So even when we're consulting in technologies, we're really trying, and we're thinking about internally and externally how we can make it to put the people in the center. And I think that's the ultimate goal you should follow. Of course, the most important thing is how to do it. I think there was a very interesting speech yesterday at the GSS. I don't know who said it, but it was, we already have the values in the society and the people. We don't have to invent them. They're already there. Maybe it seems sometimes that we forgot it and we have to remember it, but they're already there. So we just have to apply them or to think about it to the digital world. And so that's something, well, I was also young global changer, so I'm pretty happy to hear that a lot of people of them are here. But the tipping point for me was a good friend who's also like a pastor and professor for CSR. And he said 3 years ago, he remembered me on a famous sentence of James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. And sorry if you don't like it or not, I think that's really crucial. So when we really want to have a change, we need regulation. And like Philip said, I think we have already legislation we can work with, but in the core is in the responsibility of the companies. And when we take that values and the purposes seriously, what all the companies talking about, I think then we have already 90%. A very important value for us is responsibility. And when I take that serious, when I talk about responsibility and I put that together with put people first and digital ethics, then we already would have 90%. So I think it's just, and it's also how to put it into practice, all the words we're speaking, and especially us as the companies, we just have to live it. And I have to measure myself. And that's really what we're doing every week, and to ask ourselves, are we really doing what we're saying with our customers and for ourselves? And so it's finally, I think in the end, a very, very important point. We have to talk about Facebook and Google, but there are a lot of other companies, family-owned businesses. They're pretty silent, but they're also pretty powerful. And they're employing a lot of people. And if you change that people and you really try to influence them, then you have also a lot of possibilities. And that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you so far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leonis, for this point of view. I'm pretty sure we can discuss that further. But first, we listen to Helena Laurent. She's Director General of Consumer International, a consumer advocacy group who empower and champion the rights of consumers everywhere to drive change. Helena, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simone. We're actually a network of organizations like VZBV, Which, Choice, Consumer Reports, the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe, Consumer Council of Thailand, etc. 200 groups in 100 countries around the world. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you to the organizers for their kind invitation. There are so many new opportunities and ideas we could share, but I thought it might be interesting to take the conversation in a slightly different direction and talk about the consumer Internet of Things. It uses our data, but brings consumers and citizens into the digital marketplace in a very different way. This is, of course, smart devices. So the doorbells, toys, speakers, watches, home appliances that are being bought. It's an area of massive growth. So an industry that's growing 20% year on year, estimated to be about 14 trillion additional GDP by 2030. It's grown, especially at home during the pandemic, for those who are fortunate enough to be able to stay at home, and is seen as an interesting approach which could help us with greater innovation, meaningful innovation around areas like health and energy efficiency. But here's the thing, people find smart devices creepy. Some research we did, admittedly before the pandemic, found that 63% surveyed across 6 countries, Australia, France, Japan, Canada, UK, a couple of other places, 63% gave that verdict. 75% distrusted the way data is used. For those who don't buy IoT devices, 30% of them said that was exactly why they wouldn't buy. So back to that point earlier in the conversation, what's the value to business? Well, actually, your consumers care. And 50% just didn't know how to disable data collection. So there's almost a trap there where you know and you sense that your data is being used, but you don't know how to stop it. And the thing is, consumers are right to worry, because if you look, 33% last year of all infections on mobile networks were from IoT. This is a new approach, a new issue around cybersecurity that we haven't got the methods to solve. The standards are unclear and unharmonized. The labels are, as with so many different things, very unclear. This is part of the scaffolding that we need to build together. And so as part of the work that we do to collect and bring together consumer advocacy groups, we're building together with a number of others, an international coalition. This is not a national issue. These standards go across borders. The products go across borders. We need an international effort, as on so many things. And this is one that I would suggest we need to embed with unusual partners. So many coalitions tend to be just business, just civil society. In 2021, wherever we are now, it's time to break down some of those silos. And there are 4 things we need to do. One is harmonize the standards. There are some excellent ones at IEEE and ETSI. Let's make sure that there is a sort of meta standard, meta label that we're driving. Let's build the network of hackers like I Am the Cavalry to test on an ongoing basis what the reality is for consumers. Within organizations and companies, let's drive a trust by design approach, which actually starts taking consumer protection from the legalistic view into the design world. And we would say that is not just about security and privacy, but that's transparency, meaningful transparency that I find easy to access. Vulnerable support to vulnerable consumers. So I don't have to also go and work out with a PhD on the internet how to get help, that there is accessible opportunities. consumer support and complaints, and then so important that this actually does something for the environment as we increasingly wonder how we reach a 1.5 degree world and maintain that. Let's make sure that this builds in resource use, repair, and that these applications support our efforts towards the energy transition. So that would be my pitch and suggestion. It's certainly something we're building, and I can throw the sort of link to our Trust by Design thinking into the chat. We'd be delighted to talk to anybody who's excited to build this. But there are so many different aspects of the toolbox that we can talk about, and so many amazing opportunities to build, from product safety to ad tech to food systems to you name it. So wonderful to have the opportunity to share just one idea from our international network. Thank you.
Great, Helena. That was a new angle, and please put the link into the chat room. I think that is interesting for a lot of people here. And now we come to the last pitch, and that is Philip Plog, a managing partner of Fieldfisher and representing the Legal Tech Association. And again, also you, Philip, will put a slightly different angle on our discussion, I think.
Yes, indeed. I would like to start with the poll question, Teresa. Can we share the result immediately? This is a very strong and clear result. Thank you very much. I agree with this, and this is the proposition of my 3 minutes. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also massively in favor of deregulating the legal market. And this is, I think, a particularity today, because some of the talk earlier was about increasing regulation in the public sphere to get more of a control over public discussion. I believe in this particular niche area, we must deregulate in order to improve people's lives. We currently have a massive barrier for people who need help when they have legal problems. We know from research that about 70% of consumers will not seek legal help for damage claims that are below 5,000 euros. So even if they have a very clear legal situation, they will not ask a lawyer. They're afraid of the cost in many which in many European jurisdictions can be higher than the actual claim, and they do not understand the risks. When you look at it from a global perspective, it's even worse. Only 46% of the world's population have access to justice. So more than half of the world population does not have any access to justice and to the legal system. I believe that we can make justice much more accessible. We need access for new players that are not law firms. We need new remuneration systems that can take cost risk away from consumers. We need more technology in the law. We need online courts that resolve our conflicts. We need to give more freedom to the law firms as well. They must have the right to share risk with their clients. We need to open up the market of law firms to allow for other players that use technology to scale thousands of cases that are similar in nature and collect data to predict chances of success. These are not law firms, they are software firms that understand the law. With all of this, we can shift the paradigm to more focus on the people and their needs. To finish, I will give you one example. You all may know some of these new players in the market which operate in a gray area. One of them is a company called Rightmar. They operate in Germany, and what they do is they take care of receivers of social welfare, what we in Germany call Hartz IV, which is really the minimum for any German citizen to exist, and which is paid by the government. Traditionally, these people are without legal help because they typically cannot pay a lawyer, and they also don't understand the system. Now, this company in 2016 started to represent these people, but they didn't represent 1 or 10. they acquired hundreds and then thousands of these people. And in the meantime, they have filed 80,000 oppositions on the monthly pay that these people receive, arguing that they don't get enough. And they have a win rate of 42% against the German Agentur für Arbeit, which is the German government, essentially. So what we're seeing here is a massive increase in social and legal justice, because these people all of a sudden get help. And the way they get help is because these cases are being scaled in number and a lot of know-how is being acquired. But these legal ventures have massive problems because they don't have legal security in Germany and in a number of European jurisdictions. And I think that is something we must change. And that means we must go away from the lawyer's monopoly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Very clear stated claims. Thank you so much. So I have a hand up of Max. So I think that is a direct comment, Max.
I would like to comment on Helena, if that's fine.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. We start the discussion round now. I'm collecting questions. There is another question to Helena, I think. So Max, please start.
Okay, I just go. So usually when you talked about individual sovereignty or transparency in the digital sphere, usually people said, well, consumers just don't care. And I think like in the past months, we learned consumers don't care as long as it doesn't matter, but when it matters, they do care. And now as we introduce digital technologies to critical and sensible systems like healthcare, mobility, the workplace, people start to care. And for me, the major question really is, I mean, we always have this term of made in Europe and using, our restrictiveness or our regulation or how we care about certain values as something that could work as a proposition on global markets. That always stays on this very abstract level. So how, like in this window of opportunity situation where consumers globally really start to care about how is a certain app, tool, system, what have you, being developed, being monitored, being used by different actors. I mean, how can we make use of this situation as liberal democracies and as liberal market economies to really push for our, let's say, system of how to run the whole thing?
Thank you. Helena, shall we also put the second question from Christian Torun into your answer? Do companies already have sufficient market incentives to apply trust by design principles? Or do governments and maybe other actors need to do more to stimulate demand for trust by design products and services, such as establishing labels for such products?
Thank you, Simone. And I'll kind of use this a little bit of the same answer for both, I think, because
is what I assume,
where there is no silver bullet. And so I think what a first point would be, even if consumers are aware, many consumer advocates will ask, to what extent do consumers really have power? I was always intrigued in that Edelman study that there's one slide in there which says 63% of people believe consumers can force change. Now, in what marketplace do we need consumers to have to force the change they want from businesses? I think that's really interesting. So yes, there is a collective buying power, but unlike, say, the worker movement, where do we have the sort of consumer collective power to be able to make a change? Now, that's potentially one useful part of the toolbox that we should think about. And in Europe, that sort of application into class action is really interesting and is in fact something that you could see in different ways in different parts of the world. I think you can look at an entire sort of toolbox of different changes. Consumers have to be more aware. Our understanding of these things and how to use them can, of course, shift. Then absolutely we need policy change, we need standards shift. Do we need institutions upgraded or new institutions that support us with transparency in the way that we have accountancy firms now? We need an upgrade in the way we test for product safety, right? There are a whole different series of things that you could have in place. The government approach to this, and Christian, to your point, through procurement, is essential. And so I would, again, going back to that Edelman study, which I enjoy, but also sort of stressed over, what kind of society are we in where, you don't have equal levels of trust in different parts of the essential, pillars of society? We need to rebalance that. So a final thought would be, to what extent does our pressing on these different areas of the toolbox really change investment and power? And what is the type of power and type of investment flows that will lead us into a fourth industrial revolution that's really healthy and where we hit our net zero targets for our kids?
Great, thank you very much, Helena. Leonis, do you want to, because you put several remarks in the chat, do you want to also speak up, or shall we just, okay, thank you. I think it's helpful to hear it from you again.
Yeah, thank you. What I just mentioned in the chat is that I'm also, when we talk about the consumers, I agree, Helena, that, okay, you can talk how much powerful they are really, but I think, also to give responsibility to the businesses again, I think we can also, or businesses are able to shape expectation and needs of consumers. I think we saw that several times. So we can also discuss, do we really need a Facebook? Do we need all these Apple products? So companies are able to shape needs and to create needs. And maybe what I think could be a good idea also when we look to existing things, sustainability is like a very normal part for companies. So employees and also consumers looking on companies and evaluating them, are they sustainable? That became kind of normal. Of course, there's still a lot of potential, but it kind of worked out. And maybe that would be also like a parallel example to look, okay, how did that work? How could we manage to make sustainable such an important part? And maybe we just can cope with that for digital ethics. That's one point for me, or one idea. And the second thing is, like, my imagination is like, well, I'm working with business models, I'm looking on business models, and when I say you have like a business model canvas where you have like factors, how you describe a company. And I think we have to go there, that like a human-centric design should be like a standard part of every company, where consumers and investors are looking in and evaluating it. I think that would be something that would be very helpful. And maybe for the last point, I can take a question again for Philip, because I was very interested. You said, okay, and I agree completely, there's so much things existing already. So what would be concrete steps for you? Because I also see a lot of DSVGO stuff wherever it's very strict rules, which are not easy to handle. So what would be like top recommendation from your side, who say, okay, how we can use something existing and make a big change with it? When I'm allowed to put a question.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the primary tasks now is to understand to which extent you can claim disclosure of algorithms. I think that's the very core issue, and it's very difficult one, and subtle, because it is to a certain extent it's a business secret. There's no doubt about that, because that's the heart of these business models, and they are in a permanent evolution. But I think the one thing that Europe could do, as opposed to the US or China, is to find a way, sort of compromise, where transparency can be imposed to a certain degree without impairing the business as such. I think that's really, we see it in small areas, like, for example, in the patent space, there are some rules which could be applied. So it's a work that is to be done, but I think that's the core question, really.
Thank you. And now we have Dominic with a question.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask a very quick question or make a very brief remark on what Helena said. I certainly agree that consumers have strong bargaining power, but I think there is a paradox in that everybody is a consumer, right? And any action that we take results in a benefit, and that benefit will be diffused because it spreads over so many billions of consumers. And so no individual really has an incentive to do something unilaterally. And it's a little bit like saying everybody has to do something to save the world, say from a climate disaster, but individually, if everybody else is doing something entirely different, each individual does not have an incentive to really act. So the question really is, how can we make sure that in spite of this huge bargaining power, how can regulation kind of incite the incentive of each individual, right? And this has to come through law, I think, and that's why I think legislation has to be the main point and give incentives. And this is why I don't believe that things like GDPR are crucial for consumer protection and data protection, but they are not the right tools to make sure that incentives are given and that corporate digital responsibility or responsibility of companies can lead to a competitive advantage, right? We need to reestablish competition, and the competition regime is not fit to do that for digital companies. And I think a step forward, and this is a question maybe to the experts here, is do you think that for us consumers to know the value of a data point in certain applications like Facebook or anything, that would be really useful, because then consumers will understand, well, in those network effects, my data point is worth X. And so it's really meaningful to do something to make sure that I benefit from X too. Maybe that is something that would be interesting, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer? And by the way, I say that Christian now give us his picture. To all of the other listeners, you please show us your faces and participate further. We also would like to make a picture later on, so that hopefully encourage you and gives you an incentive. So is anyone... or shall we first hear Christian maybe, and then we come back to the question Dominic just said?
To be honest, I would like to come back to Dominic's question.
That's wonderful.
I think that digitalization poses a wide range of different kinds of challenges. And obviously, there's not one cure to all these different kinds of challenges. So when it comes to misuse of market power and market dominance, I think that we need to have a very different treatment than, for example, that we expect companies to put into practice in their IoT devices secure transmission. So when it comes, for example, to making sure that digital products are safe, I think that, for example, safety labels or so could play a role so that consumers know when they choose between the one IoT device or the other, oh, okay, this has the BSI, whatever security label, it is secure. And there you can have market power to transform markets in a certain direction, as we did it, for example, with organic food or whatever. So we can apply some of the principles to these digital areas. But obviously, this won't solve all the issues that we have with digital companies. But I think that we should use some of the stuff that we learned in other sustainable issues, and that we should transform this also to the digital market. And I really like also Pechman's point about, using investors' powers. For example, I'm sitting in the advisory board of EcoWorld, which is a sustainable fund. And we are now considering, what expectations do we have with regard to the digital responsibility of companies, and whether we consider their practices to be responsible. So we take this in our investment decisions into account. And I think we need to have much more investors that think that way. But we now in this round need to think about ways of how do we get the investors to think about this, similar to the mind shift that they had when it comes to CO2 emissions. There's a big change throughout the last 2 years. And we need the similar change when it comes to digital responsibility issues in the investor community.
Great, thank you very much, Christian. And I see Helena, you had your hand up?
Yeah, if you're okay with me.
Absolutely.
On the labels point, so this is so interesting because we're living through a time when there's so much change. So imagine, we as consumer advocates, every single day there's a conversation about we need to make consumers more aware of biotech, of IoT, of energy efficiency in their home, of the SDGs, it's exceptional. And people are trying to live through both a pandemic and an economic crisis, and they know there is a climate crisis. So I think, of course, consumer awareness and our education are crucial. And some of the ways, like, how much do you hear about consumer rights in school or in university or at any point, would be really important and interesting. Likewise, labels are very useful, but I just want to point out the number of labels and the plethora of things that you have to look for. If you look at the plastic packaging situation right now, we found about 360 different labels. The likelihood that you find a label that tells you exactly what you can do, where you're standing now, and how to clearly recycle something, we don't want a similar thing to happen in the space of IoT. And so I think that's why that sort of series of things we have to look at is so important. You cannot rely purely on consumers at a time of incredible technological change. At the same time, yes, of course, let's think about the consumer information revolution that allows us as a society to take part in this and to feel excited and comfortable about it as well. I think I would just love to see more support for innovative businesses that actually start from the basis of consumer rights and are looking actually at how to provide support to consumers who are looking for legal support, who are looking for comparisons. They are actually filling a market gap, and there's an interesting opportunity there. Let's support the entrepreneurs who are thinking that way already.
Thank you so much, Helena. I don't see any hands up at the moment, but we have a question from the audience. But it's very broad, but how can we create a knowledge society that has more access to reliable knowledge than fake news? As I agree totally to you, Helena, at the moment there is so much information, and it was also in the chat. I think there is just so much to know, to good behavior. It's climate, it's food, it's plastic, so it's overwhelming. So I see, Max, you have an answer? The answer?
No, I don't. But I would like to reply to Helena. And I mean, I fully agree that people are overwhelmed with information, and that you have this kind of millions of labels signifying different things. And, then like a Netflix documentary comes out saying that even like the phishing labels people used to trust in, they are not really trustworthy, and people just give up. I mean, I fully agree. But then when it comes down to digital literacy, I think what will not work is only kind of to think about teaching digital literacy skills, but we really have to think about how can people acquire digital literacy by practice. And that means maybe on the scale of a city, the urban landscape, like what Francesca Bria has been doing in Barcelona, for example, to really get some practice to citizens' hands so that they have at their fingertips really, what am I doing with my data? What kind of value is being generated? What kind of business models can be developed upon this data point? What Dominic has been saying, and only if more citizens have this kind of practice will they then be able to be sovereign consumer and not overwhelmed with this kind of ideology of consumer trust.
Good. Now we have Felix with a remark.
Yes, I just wanted to add to this crucial point that I think it's always important to keep in mind that digital literacy and regulation are no alternatives, but they should go hand in hand, because I don't think without real transparency, for instance, that digital literacy will lead us anywhere. If as a user, I don't have a right to understand who is targeting me, for instance, with paid political content, if I don't have the right to learn what kind of personal data are being used to target me, and if I don't have a right to withdraw my so-called consent that I allegedly gave 5 years ago when I signed up to Facebook or whatever other platform, digital news literacy won't really get us far. So I just want to make the plea that both should go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's too complex as an issue to just have one tool to tackle it. Huh? So we haven't touched on the enforcement either, Helena.
Sorry, I'm going to throw that one in. I think these are all fantastic points. I think one of the things that we've seen from around the world is you can have the greatest policy in place, but if that's not enforced, then it's a little bit complicated. And even the most egregious scams and strange things that have happened during the pandemic are going under the radar. One thing would be, how can we better collaborate across borders? How can we strengthen enforcement agencies? How can we really bring together organizations and make them more agile and ready for the whatever century we're in now?
Yeah, so I have no hands up anymore, and I have to come to a wrap up. I think I heard a lot of possible ways to solve it, and again, also a lot of buts. I think an interesting part in the discussion is that big values like responsibility, trust, and ethics are so important. And they, of course, are more built in society values and in education, and not only education about tools or about data or about data privacy, you name it, but it's also about the general civil society values. I think that would be the basic, because if everybody had that, we most probably would not face such an issue. On the other hand, to bring that back, we had, Huberta, starting with the training and how important the training is and the awareness. So I think we definitely should do, as we also had heard from Helena, do encourage customers, individuals, also employees to understand better about the tools we are facing and the responsibility every individual has. But I also like Leonie Petschmann's point. Let's take investment power. We see that it works for diversity and it works for climate. On the other hand, I see the same dilemma for investors as I see it for customers or other individuals, because the list is so long. Where shall I invest and what is my focus? And will it become too much just to look at all the angles of the issues we are facing? And then we are back, I think, to regulations and incentives and to enforcement. So we need all parts of the society and the business to work together. And that may be the tricky part, but it may also be the maybe easy part, as we are individuals as well as working in organizations. We can be role models as well as guiding people and organizations in the direction we just heard. So I think we don't have the final solution, but we have a lot of ideas. Any remarks? Did I miss something? Is there anything? I was vague at the end, obviously, but it would be too easy to after 90 minutes to have the whole solution. Yeah, Okay, that was a thumbs up. Thank you very much for that. Okay, great. So there is a possibility to continue the discussion. There will be a link in the chat which leads into a private room. And I think there are several points where we can deepen the discussion and find further points where we could work together. So, you see the link now in the chat. So whoever wants to continue, very happy that you go into that chat room. It is also in the program, and there are also joining rooms in the lobby. So if you want to continue even beyond that, despite the fact that it is a Friday evening, please feel free. It's such an important topic, and it's so important that we make progress here. So I really thank you a lot for this vivid participation and this wonderful proposals, and I'm sure we will hear more of you and your organizations in this respect. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Simone, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.